I think just an opportunity that we have been afforded, we obviously appreciate. Normally the presentation lasts about 3 hours, Chair, so I've whittled it down to about an hour. So I'm going to be trying a different way of presenting the bill. And what we'll see then is I'll skip, for example, things such as the definitions that people can read through themselves. I'm just quickly going to go into the presentation that I did prepare. Is that visible, Chair? Program Director, is that
not
visible?
Yet. Not yet, Mr. Szana, not yet. Thank you, we can see it.
Okay, thank you, Program Director. So as correctly stated by the CEO, what you do have is a bill that is now out. So the bill has been out since around about June, signed off in May, and this bill will then be around until the 31st of July. After the 31st of July, there will be no further opportunity for any submissions. Unfortunately, there has to be a closing date and so on for this sort of stuff. So if you do submit after the 31st, it will not be considered. If we get into it, a quick one, I'm going to show the actual document to make it easier for you to navigate while we talk to it. So what you'll see there is an underlining of certain components of the document, and that means that that is new information that has been inserted. The bracketed component in highlight means that it has been removed, and while that is the case, I want to remind you that these are the proposals that have been made by various parties. This document has been through the Advisory Council, it's been through NEDLAG, it's also been through various other parties prior to it being submitted for publication and approval by Cabinet for us to make a comment on. So the document you have before you has been through the mill already, if you like, and you still have an opportunity. Now, anything you see does not mean that it's fixed at this point in time, and it's important to note that. You have an opportunity to make an input into it, and if you have sufficiently motivated for it, it will then be considered accordingly. Now, if we don't consider your stuff, let's say 1 or 2 or 3 or all of it, there has to be a reason or a motivation for that, and record of that will be kept. One of the key things, of course, is the removal of reasonably practicable. And those of you that have been around for some time will know that this is coupled to 4 criteria. Now, the removal of that is very, very important. And as one person stated, does it become more prescriptive? And the answer to that is naturally a big and resounding yes. The implications of that we'll get into maybe a little later. The background then, I've given you some of the background, where we find ourselves. The first act came out in 1918, and if the current bill gets published eventually within the next 18 months, the implications of that is that we'll be on our 5th act in just over 100 years as a country. Now, some of the things that I'd like you to consider as part of the future, and also for you to think about when you go through this document, is the informal sector. What does it mean? If you look at Stats SA defines the informal sector. Now, the informal sector, of course, in terms of that definition, includes SMMEs as part of what is known as the informal sector. So it's not just the person that has a business on the street corner. It could be a so-called formal setup that by virtue of its definition is now part of the informal sector. Now, so that you know, the ILO is working with South Africa in relation to formalizing the informal sector, this particular area will receive attention, and you'll know more about it as time goes on. Approved inspection authorities. This is something that we looked at for the informal sector because of the importance of the work that is being performed by the AIAs, or the approved inspection authorities, as we call them. The importance of that is, if we don't find a middle road in relation to this for the informal sector, because apparently, according to those that operate in the sector, the costs are quite prohibitive. So if you're looking at the smaller sectors and the more specifically, the informal side, where more than 60% of our people run businesses in the economy, and you'll find that during this period, that sector would have increased substantially worldwide, if you like, due to the nature of what we are going through now. When you look at AIAs, I'm saying to you that I'm going to be moving into the informal sector with this. The nature and format of this, of course, will play itself out in due course, and you'll know more about it. But this thing has now been not only defined as it is rather in the current legislation, but also what you'll find in the new bill, you'll find that there's a whole section dedicated to AIAs. And in addition to that, you'll find it also in the general administrative regulations when it is reviewed, because after this bill comes out, all the regulations will have to ensure that it is aligned to what is in the Act. So this is also an area that you'll find has gone to more detail, and that it will affect or impact you more than what it has currently. So the AIAs, that is a very big component as far as I'm concerned, and a major insert. Women, children, and people with disabilities. This is obviously an area that we need to focus on in terms of health and safety, and it's an area that traditionally has not received the kind of attention that it should have in occupational health and safety. So in South Africa moving forward, this is an area then in the future that we'll be focusing on, and our strategy will make sure that it properly encapsulates what we need to around this area. If you look at other documents in South Africa that also provide the type of guidance that is needed in health and safety, you'll find in the Decent Country Work Program, we've included the informal sector, as well as women, children, and people with disabilities is included in the Decent Country Work Program. And the third Decent Country Work Program has been published, and the health and safety component is attached as an annexure to that document that has been published over the last 2 years or so. Greater focus on occupational health issues. This is an area that we need to attend to and ensure that it is properly covered. You'll recall that it was so-called or supposedly included in the 1993 legislation, and almost 3 decades later, we find that this area has not received the kind of attention, neither have we built up the type of structures or systems that are required to ensure that this area is properly attended to. Now, one of the big areas that you can see that this thing is definitely not getting the focus is in the area of information. If you ask me to provide you with information on occupational health related matters, we're going to give you information, but that information, when you compare it with the countries worldwide, you're going to see that our statistics are nowhere close to what it should be. If you take the ILO statistics, the ILO statistics give you a 1-to-3 ratio almost in terms of the number of occupational health related issues or incidents as compared to the number of safety related incidents. that take place in our country. So this is an area that will be receiving greater focus, and a lot of work has already gone into changing this area. Changes to policy, training of inspectors, informed employers and employees and other stakeholders. And obviously in that, we need to make sure that the tools are created for both our stakeholders as well as our inspectors, of course, in moving forward. So what I've indicated then is I'm not going to go through the definitions. I'll make this presentation available to your organization. You're more than welcome to circulate it. And while the rest of the presentation is included at the back of this, I'm not going to go into it. There you go. I'm going to go back to the document because the document, a lot of you will have that. I see it has been circulated, and I'm going to quickly use that as a base document to work through in order to ensure that you follow where I am and what I'm doing with regard to this presentation there. If you give me a moment, Chairperson, while I quickly get into the document. So this is the document I was talking to, Chair. You'll see that I'm the contact. You'll forward the information to me. It's Tibor, tibor.szana@labour.gov.za. That's my details, and the deadline for submission is 31st of July 2021. So as indicated, that will be the base. Now, the very first page I'm going to is page, if you give me a moment, I'll give you the page number. It's around about page 17. And that deals with the safety management system. Let me just quickly, Program Director, just go over the long title. The long title that came out with this bill then is to amend the Occupational Health and Safety Act of 1993, so as to delete, substitute, and insert certain definitions, to effect certain technical corrections, and to make further provisions in respect of the health and safety of persons at work and for the health and safety of persons in connection with the use of plant and machinery, to further regulate the protection of persons other than persons at work against hazards to health and safety arising out of or in connection with the activities of persons at work. And then it further encapsulates the issues around the advisory council. Now, I want you to also bear in mind, even with the pandemic, we became very mindful of that in the directions that were published by the Minister of Employment and Labour. And in that, what we have noticed is that there's a greater recognition to how an employer's workplace can impact on those others than those in the employ of the employer, if you like. So while it's always been there in terms of Section 9, you'll see that we will continue to place that as a central focus. Your business can have an impact on the people around you and those that do visit your premises, if you like. So nothing there has changed. That particular issue has remained the same. I'm skipping all the definitions as I've indicated, and I'm going directly to Section 7. I'm not going to focus on the Advisory Council. Those are issues that you can read yourself. I'm going to major changes in the bill that I deem something for you to take note of. Maybe one thing before we do go up is the introduction of sectoral advisory forums. Now, while the name is new, the concept has been around for several decades, and I'll quickly mention why. If you take the Advisory Council, if you take the Diving Council, that has been around for some time. Now, reference is made to the Diving Advisory Board, which is quite important. And then also you have not only the diving advisory board, but you have also the explosives council. Now those names are going to change because the advisory council found you cannot be mentioning several other councils when there is one advisory council that advises the minister, while the sectoral advisory forums advise the chief inspector on what is happening on a day-to-day basis and what are the issues that we need to take note of and so on. So explosives, diving, construction, we talk about the construction technical task team, that will be called the sectoral advisory forum as well, in order to bring it in line with what is known or what is captured in the Act or the bill currently, if you like. So other critical things, if you are nominated to serve on these forums, a person may not be nominated to serve on more than one technical committee. A technical committee advises the advisory council only, and the advisory council will set up a technical committee. A sectoral advisory forum may be established by the chief inspector to advise the chief inspector on matters related to any regulation and so on. So quite important, but things that you need to take note of if you are given the opportunity to serve on that. I'll get to the issue that I raised. It will be on, let me just get your page 13. It starts at the bottom there, health and safety management system, and it goes on to page 14. At the top there, you'll see it noted, page 14, and then you'll see section 7. Now, quite important, and I want you to take note of if there are any anomalies in where this is captured throughout the bill, then you need to make sure that there's a single silver lining that is being drawn with regard to this. So I'm on page 14 in the document itself. The chief inspector may direct an employer or group of employers in writing to develop and implement a health and safety management system. So when an inspector sees this, they're going to look at several issues. Firstly, go and see if there's a definition for a safety management system. And if there is one, what are the elements of that safety management system? Because the inspector is going to have a look at whether or not you're complying with both what is written here as well as what is captured in the definition around this matter. Is it in writing? If it's not in writing, it would be a contravention. And also, if you're not implementing what has been written, it will be a contravention as well. A directive under subsection 1 shall be accompanied by guidelines concerning the contents of the health and safety management system concerned. So we as a Department of Employment and Labor would need to make sure that you have a guideline in respect of the type of things that would be expected to be seen in this particular document. And the advisory council would need to make sure that that is the case. So this is the first big change. You don't see discussion around the safety management system in the current legislation. You do see it now. Section 8, how does Section 8 change? It changes in relation to what you note there, and we'll quickly just go through that. Conducting a workplace risk, a specific risk assessment, a workplace specific risk assessment, and thereafter you will develop and implement. So you'll conduct it, you'll develop, and you'll implement a risk management plan in writing in respect of every risk identified. Now, it's quite important to note, which you'll see in the section as well, it comes up that when you're required to get experienced or competent people involved in doing your risk assessment, that it's people that understand the business of what you're engaged in to be able to identify those risks. Now, you don't want an inspector to come around to your workplace and see that you've allowed someone who is lacking in competence to be able to identify the type of risks that you have at your workplace. So you'll need to conduct a workplace, that is your workplace, where you are in, and this does not allow you then to copy and paste willy-nilly for every single business. Once you've done one for one business, you cannot go and copy and paste it for every other business without ensuring that there's relevance for the workplace that you are taking it to. So that is quite important, a workplace risk, specific risk assessment. In other words, every business you need to identify things that are there that create the type of risks that you want to mitigate or take away. So this subsection, quite important. Again, I draw your attention to the fact that you need to make sure that that you look at the definitions, because the definitions are important in regard to this particular issue. Again, what does it call for? And those are the elements that you are going to make sure exists in your risk assessment document in order for it to comply. Not having it in your document means that you do not comply, which makes it a contravention. Ensuring that the workplace specific risk assessment is conducted by a person or persons who are competent to pronounce on all risks associated with that workplace. And you'll do well to make a note of who are the people that are involved and what are the areas of competence to be able to assist in developing such a document. Ensuring that the workplace specific risk assessment plan is in place and is available at the workplace when requested by an inspector. Not having it at the workplace, having it at any other place other than at that workplace, and having it available to an inspector. If you do not, it again is a contravention of the legislation, which is something that you need to take note of. Now, when you look at this and you are wanting to make comments, is this something you can comply with? Is it in line with international best practice? And so on and so on. And if it isn't, you'll then make your own recommendations in regard to that, providing a strong motivation, of course. Otherwise, it won't be factored in. Again, it's up to the Advisory Council to make that determination. Now, the Advisory Council is made up of three parties: organized business, organized labor, and government constituents. So it's not something that we sit on our own and develop. It will also obviously go to NEDLAG again to make sure that it's in line with what the different constituents are expecting, a workable or implementable document. If anything here is not implementable, you're more than welcome to raise that matter as well, of course. So quite an important two areas raised so far. In terms of Section 8, you can say it's inferred and all that. It doesn't matter anymore. We've now brought it to the fore, and you have an opportunity to look at whether or not it's workable. Ensuring that no work is undertaken unless the control measures contained in the risk management plan are complied with. Now, any formal business that wants to be successful, you will know that when you're doing your strategy, this is an important component of developing your strategy. You need to look at these aspects, obviously, amongst many others. But the point is, you're already doing this. You might just not be doing it in relation to occupational health and safety. Under F, you have, as far as is reasonably practicable, not permitting any is removed. And it just very, very plain and straight says, ensuring that no employee is permitted. Now, very simply, a simple example of this could be, you leave the keys in the forklift truck or in the heister, and you are told that you must remove any area that could create a problem for your workplace. So have you increased the level of danger and so on? by leaving the keys in, you know that you are, and you need to remove it. So you need to develop best practice in terms of this. And what is that? Obviously, you're going to remove the keys once the vehicle is not in use and place it in safekeeping, etc., etc. The point I'm making is the moment you take away reasonably practicable, you are looking at other things other than what the sections have traditionally allowed for. The 4 criteria fall away. Here you will now make sure that no employee is permitted to do what they are not required to do, what must not happen at your workplace. This is quite an important change, and it happens throughout this bill, is that has been removed, as you'll see. And lastly, in that part, ensuring communication of the relevant components of the risk management plan to every employee. Quite important. And when you look at section 13 and what it says around conversancy and everything else, duty to inform, you're going to see that this is quite an important point. Now we go on to section 9. Section 9 deals with that area that I've discussed with before, where it talks to people other than employees in your employ. It also talks to the self-employed person. Every employer shall conduct an undertaking in such a manner to ensure that the risk posed by identified hazards to persons other than those in the direct employ of the organization who may be directly affected by the organization's activities are not thereby exposed to hazards to the health or safety, and the risk is managed in line with the risk management plan. So again, we go and we see that there are square brackets above, and those square brackets, everything in between with a line that I put diagonally across it, that is removed. And you'll see that throughout the document, I've placed diagonal lines through the areas that you can remove, mainly the bigger portions of it. Now, the underlined component is what I've said to you. That is now the addition that has been brought in to this act. So the same issue remains then, but the element of risk and so on that has been introduced is clearly brought to the fore, and you're required to make sure that everything is in line with it. Self-employed persons shall conduct an undertaking in such a manner to ensure that the risk posed by the identified hazards to that self-employed person and any other persons who may be directly affected by the activities of the work performed on that premises are managed in line with a specific risk management plan as contemplated. So you can see that it's moving into that realm that is deemed quite important, and you do well to obviously make sure that you comply with it. Now, when we go to section 10, you'll remember that section 10 was very famous for this, what they call the foot stewards clause, also known as what you buy is what you see, basically, or you're going to buy the thing as is. So this is quite an important thing, but it has changed, and you do well to take note what the changes are. And included in that is what we call the GHS component, or the globally harmonized system inclusion of labeling, packaging, and all that stuff. Now, it also appears in the hazardous chemical agents regulations. The new first phase of that regulation also has it, but we have a component here. Now, when you read this act, read it in conjunction with other legislation that also talks to what do you call it? People who are buying things and so on. There's a whole act that deals with that on its own, and it's something that you'll need to take, you'll have to take cognizance of and be mindful of when you are reading section 10 and section 22, more specifically. So section 10 Together with section 22, take note of the changes that take place there, and also that it begins its harmonization with a globally harmonized system by its inclusion also in the hazardous chemical agents regulations. When you look at the changes to section 11 and 12, section 11 and 12 deals with listed work. Now, listed work has never been utilized in South Africa in all the years that it's been a section. That will change in the next couple of years because there are areas that I believe should be brought into this. Now, when you look at listed work, a very simple example of that is what we have in the BCA. On the BCA side, insofar as it relates to the sectoral determinations. You'll remember that the sectoral determinations, while they don't differ in terms of what it seeks to achieve in the basic conditions of Employment Act, it is sector specific. So we might have to do the same thing, and what will allow us to do so is section 11 and 12 that touches on listed work, and those are things you can read through on your own. If it does get applied, you'll see that it draws on what already appears in under risk assessments and management and the safety management system, and it's all there for you to read through. Remember that I'm tied in with time, so I have to make sure that I use this time and get through it very fast. The other aspect, I mentioned it early on, duty to inform, section 13 deals with the issue of conversancy, and you'll see there that it removes as far as is reasonably practicable. Now, one of the easiest ways of, again, trying to explain it to you would be to say that where an employer is required to train an employee, and let's say we put in front of the employer is required to do the following X, Y, Z, and whatever in terms of training, we put as far as is reasonably practicable. Now, reasonably practicable, the moment we put that in, it allows the employer to consider how he's going to do that training, or she's going to do that training in relation to the legislation. And if they are not able to, the full criteria gives them the opportunity to jigger out of that whole situation, which is obviously problematic. Now, it's being removed here in relation to conversancy, which means that you as an employer need to make sure that when you're advising the employee in relation to their scope of authority, and you touch on the issue of conversancy, you're also making sure that the employee fully understands what it is that they are doing. You're not leaving the employee doubting. You're making sure before you leave that the employee fully understands what it is that he or she is required to do. Now, where the definition does not appear in section 1 or in regulations 1 in all the regulations, then you go to a dictionary and you go and look it up. So the word conversant or conversancy, you can go and look it up in a dictionary, Oxford or Webster's, and go and determine what exactly does it require you to do. And that is what you're going to make sure it does. But take note, you can no longer lean on or rely on as far as is reasonably practicable, or reasonably practicable, if you like. Now, section 16, another important area. Section 16 has been on the table for as long as 1993, where it says the following, and it has changed to some degree, and you'll see what it is. Now, where section 16 went up to, I think it was sub 5, you're going to see that is broken up, and you'll find it in different areas. But the first part of the problem is contained here in terms of section 16. A chief executive officer shall, and boom, removed is reasonably practicable. And you need to determine whether or not it's rational to do that, given the circumstances that you might find yourself in as an employer. Now let's go through that. You remove as far as is reasonably practicable. And then it says that the CEO is gonna make sure that the following is in place. Ensure that the duties of your employer or his or her employer as contemplated in this act are properly discharged. No reliance anymore on reasonably practicable. You will make sure the employer's duties as is contemplated are properly discharged. What does that mean? And you need to go through that understanding in order to determine, basically, you as a CEO, consider yourself sunk by the removal of reasonably practicable, because you now have to make sure that you do everything in your power to do what the employer is required to do. Chief Executive Officer shall develop, implement, and continuously review the health and safety management system as the employer may be directed in terms of section 7.1, going back to the safety management system. And please, the notion that the CEO referred to here is a safety CEO is preposterous. Let's just get that straight, that this is the CEO of the company, not a safety CEO. I just want to put that to bed. Sub 2, without derogating from his or her responsibility or liability in terms of subsection 1 and 1A, a chief executive officer may in writing. So the CEO does not need to, but where the CEO wants to, they may delegate in writing any duty contemplated in the subsections to any person. Now, let's get that straight. Any duty must now be put in writing, and don't say, I now delegate all my duties in terms of the Occupational Health and Safety Act to you, person XYZ. No. This must be very specific in terms of what it is you are delegating, and be very clear that reasonably practicable has been removed. And you'll see how it further puts nails into the coffin. Any duty contemplated in the said subsections to any person under his or her control, which person shall act subject to the control and direction of the chief executive officer in the interest of occupational health and safety. Now, let's go on and see how important these things are. 2A, a person so delegated in terms of subsection 2 may not further delegate the duty to any other person. Period. Removes the big debate that you want to delegate and subdelegate and do all kinds of funny delegations. Now that the moment you start doing that, you're removing that direction and control that is supposed to be under the CEO. You are now you're taking it out of that control the moment you give that to the sub to someone else. Remember, the CEO has to have direct control and direction with regard to such a delegation. The provisions of subsection 1 shall not relieve an employer of any responsibility, accountability, or liability. I'm not going to go through that you can read, except to say that what's happening when you are busy, let me say, appointing a health and safety representative, it becomes a very important component. Now, suffice it to say, if there is a dispute when you are trying to appoint a health and safety representative, if there's a dispute, that dispute, there is a process that is included both here as well as in general admin regulations. Now, once this bill is published as an act, with whatever changes, then you'll find that the general admin regulations has also got to be brought in line with what is captured in the bill and whatever's published in the act. So this is quite an important part. The health and safety reps, the role of the health and safety rep changes in relation to the work that they are performing. Where they are currently given the health and safety reps currently don't necessarily need to perform the work as such, but the employer has to make sure that the work is performed. That is quite an important part. And why it's important, you need to understand, is now in terms of this bill, the health and safety representative must do the work. Is no longer an option. The health and safety rep will be required to do the work that is required to be done. In addition to that, there are some duties that are added to. Again, you can read that. The important part that I've explained to you now, you need to be cognizant of. Where an inspector, for example, visits a workplace, you'll find that the health and safety rep can also get a copy of the inspector's report within a 14-day period. As you go through that, receive information from inspectors as contemplated in section 36, and where such information is not made available within 14 days of the inspection, the information will be requested from the chief inspector. Now, over there, make a note, it's the provincial chief inspector, excuse me, not the national chief inspector for health and safety. Report on instances of non-compliance with this act to the employer or the health and safety committee. Now, what we have found over the past 18 months or so during COVID is that these structures are just absolutely a disaster. Nothing is happening to the extent that it should have happened. When you look at the fact that compliance levels are way down, then you are saying to yourself, no wonder we are having problems both at the workplace and in the communities, because we are not managing health and safety in relation to the structures that are supposed to exist and are supposed to work within the workplace environment. So here you can see the inclusion on page, your page, let me just get to your page 26. You can see the inclusion of the duties that have been highlighted for you now in terms of the health and safety rep. There are a couple of additional things that have been included, which you must be mindful of, please. The dots that you see, the yellow dots, are just where it indicates the square brackets that exist, that are, excuse me, for removal. So I'm not going to read through that. That you can read through on your own. I want to take you to the more critical areas. Section 19, section 20, and section 21. 20 deals with the health and safety rep's appointment. 18 deals with the duties of the health and safety rep. Section 19 is the appointment of the health and safety committee, and section 20 is the duties of the health and safety committee, which are quite important. Now, if you go and look at the health and safety committees where they exist and the duties required of them, you can make a note wherever you want to. These duties continue not to be complied with. You don't find easily recommendations made to an employer and even a sign-off by an employer or someone who has been delegated those duties by the employer or the CEO, if you like, to perform those functions on behalf of the CEO. So this is why we continue having low levels of compliance, because structures don't exist And you'll also find that when there's a contravention in terms of section 17 up to 20, that there will be an immediate prosecution because of the non-existence of these things that are required to be in place. I'm just going to go to the parts that I want to raise because I'm running out of time. Some of the things, as I say, you can read through on your own. I just want to bring the important things to your attention. Section 24 on page 34, you'll take note it touches on major incident. You'll take note that major hazard installations exist, and therefore major incident could be defined under major hazardous installation regulations. Now, those regulations are about to be published at some stage in the not too distant future, and it's a totally revamped regulation that will be coming out, and quite important then that particular area has been taken out. Section 24, you'll notice it appears in definitions in section 1, and there it refers you to section 24, which is the definition for incident. The health or safety of any person was endangered or where hazardous substances or biological agents were spilled or released. So for the first time, you see reference to biological agents, which is quite important. This is an area that as we move into the 5th industrial revolution and so on, you're going to find that this is the focal point and an area that is, we are obviously on the brink of major breakthroughs and changes in that area that have been taking place already. And as we move forward with the 4th industrial revolution, it will create the foundational work that will take place in that period. So new things coming with new changes and so on. Here's a new input. The employee, user, or self-employed person shall provide the department with a copy of incident statistics annually on the 1st day of March of each year. The incident stats referred to in paragraph A shall be provided in the prescribed format. The incident statistics shall include statistics for contractors that occurred while working on the employer premises, provided that the contractors are required to provide incident statistics to the department as well. Now, the underreporting I spoke of, we're trying to take care of that as well, so that we can get to the bottom of some of the issues. Now, in some cases with subcontractors or contractors, more serious incidents take place there with contractors than with the principal employer or the main employee, if you like. And this is why we want them to report on these things, that nothing falls into the cracks, as it were. However, take note here and in other areas for the construction sector, there is a change that is brought about in relation to the sector. What is that change? It is involving the contractors. Contractors have a greater role to play and report on in relation to what they are doing, which is obviously an important aspect. Victimization, in terms of section 26, you'll see when you go to the actual section, it is a very, very drawn out section and very boring and laborious to read. This one has been broken up into subsections, makes it a lot easier to read, and is very clear in terms of what the intention is around the victimization component. An area that has not received the attention that it should have, but I do believe that moving forward it will, given the changes that the Act is going to bring about. I believe that victimization could increase to the extent that we might have to lean on this particular section for whatever reason. If you look at the type of reports I get from people on the floor, employees who write me emails, one of the big things is, please protect my name. Please protect the name of person of my family member because of for obvious reasons. So those are serious issues that no employee should be working under. This is an area you can go through. The only thing I want to draw to your attention, it currently exists, but we've changed from a certificate to a card. And in this particular case, we say to you, the inspector must produce identification. They are able to do so, but the bill goes a step further in referring to a card that we have already provided to inspectors. And any inspector who does not have identification with them in the form of a very specific card, you do not need to allow them onto your premises. You can also confirm with your local provincial chief inspector whether or not that inspector is in fact an inspector from the Department of Employment and Labour. If they are not, send them away. I'm not going to go through this. You can read through that on your own. Just bear with me quickly as I take you to the next area. I just want to cover in detail quickly give me a moment while I go there. I'm going to the portion that deals with appeals. It's on page 49 about. Okay, page 50, 49, 50. Now, this is quite an important part. When it deals with appeals, you can appeal any decision. So let's see what it says. Section 35 of the Principal Act. Now, 35 is the one that it appears in currently. A person aggrieved by a decision, taken by an inspector in relation to a notice and a directive served under the provisions of this Act may appeal against such decision to the Chief Inspector. Now here's the crux or the crunch. A person who wishes to appeal in terms of subsection 1 shall within 14 days of the delivery of the inspector's decision lodge such an appeal with the Chief Inspector in writing, setting out clearly the grounds on which the appeal is made. So you can appeal the decision of an inspector. Once you appeal to the Chief Inspector, the Chief Inspector is going to give you a decision, and you can even take that decision to the High Court. And the High Court can make a decision on that, on the decision of the Chief Inspector if you so desire. Now, the improvement notice and the contravention notice that an inspector serves falls away during an appeal until the decision is made, whatever that decision is. In the case of a prohibition notice, it stays in place until the final decision is made. So the prohibition notice stays in place. Be mindful of that. Now, the 60 days that are indicated currently in the Act are 60 days for you to make an appeal. They are not there for you to comply. As an employer, your immediate response should be you're either going to comply or you're not going to comply. If you disagree with an inspector, you're going to appeal that decision of the inspector. In future, you're only going to have 14 days. Now, if your proposal is that you should only be given 7 days to comply, then you're going to make that recommendation. If you're happy with the 14 days, then leave it as it is. You don't need to comment on that. If you'd like to extend that to 60 days again, you need to provide a very good reason as to why you think it should be 60 days. If you're not going to comply, you know you're not going to comply. You don't need 60 days in order to make that decision, in my opinion. So the rest of it goes into decision making or the procedure, and the procedure aspect you can look at. Again, here's the High Court and the decision according to that. And then the part that I spoke to you about, the prohibition notice in relation to the prohibition notice staying in place until the decision is made by the High Court. Disclosure of information, take note of the POPIA or the POPI Act in relation to this, and this will be brought in line with POPI in order to ensure that the two are on the same page, as it were. I'm not going to go through that. I want to take you through to the two most important areas, and then I'll close Program Director. So in the next 9 minutes, I'll try and finish off. So administrative fines then is a new thing. You can think of it as something similar to a spot fine, if you like. Now, administrative fines, and you'll see that there's a schedule known as Schedule 2 to this document or the Act, and it's reflecting in this section 37A. If a person commits a breach of this Act, the inspector may, by written notice to that person, impose an administrative fine in accordance with Schedule 2, which is at the back as I've indicated. Now, imagine now, and you'll recall that penalties is under the section 38 of this document, where section 8 deals with Schedule 1. Now here's the change, the major change. Currently, an inspector comes to your premises, they serve a notice, and you comply with the notice. The inspector goes away, and you don't hear from the inspector until the next inspection or until the department gets a complaint. Now let's go back quickly. Let's say that the inspector goes to your premises and finds a contravention in terms of this Act, this bill now, in terms of this bill. Let's say in terms of Schedule 1, they find there are contraventions there. They will then, how it will work is the inspector will go to your premises, serve a notice, leave your premises. Within 14 days, you either appeal or you do not appeal. If you do not appeal, then what will happen is the inspector after 14 days can visit your premises again and determine whether or not you've complied. If you have complied, good. If you haven't complied, then you have a problem because now the inspector is going to follow through with the prosecution. That's the first one, Schedule 1, Section 38 of this bill. Section 37A works out as follows. Inspector goes out to your premises. Remember, this is not there currently. This is a totally new enforcement process. So I've highlighted the first one to you. The second one is in terms of Schedule 2. They go out, do an inspection, determine in terms of Schedule 2 what the contraventions are. Let's say, for argument's sake, and please, I'm just using arbitrary numbers now. Let's say in terms of that schedule, section 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 is contravened. And in terms of that, you are required to pay a fine of 50,000 Rand each. In terms of the 50,000 Rand each, if you add them up, and there are 5 contraventions in terms of Schedule 2, then it means that you are now going to have to pay within a certain time frame 250,000 Rand. So the second part of the enforcement process is the administrative fine process. If an inspector comes out to your premises, it could be section 38 or 37A, or it could be both 37A and 38. In other words, Schedule 1 contraventions as well as Schedule 2 contraventions. So you could find yourself faced with two separate enforcement processes playing itself out. However, in both cases, there is an appeal procedure that is attached to it. And if you feel that the inspector is not correct in his or her assessment, it will come down to this, that you'll have a look at how you can mitigate the issue, or you're going to have to end up paying the fine. That is the bottom line, of course. But there are two enforcement processes that will play itself out now. So in the last 4 minutes that I've got, there are other areas that you can look at. Some of these, a lot of these things that have been broken up to into further sections, rather, like 37A, B, C, D, whatever. Those were all part of 38 at some stage, over and above a new thing here or there. But it's been broken up for consideration. I'm not going to go into some of these details. You can go into it yourself. As I say, you would know it if you know the current act. The stuff is written there, and you can go into it. Something else that's very important under penalties then, I've already said to you, let's read it. A person convicted of an offence in terms of section indicated in Schedule 1 may be sentenced to a fine or to imprisonment for a period not exceeding the period mentioned in Schedule 1. A person, now this is the second part of it that you need to be mindful of. A person convicted of an offence in terms of this act, for which no penalty is otherwise or expressly determined, may be sentenced to a fine of 100,000 rand or to imprisonment for a period not exceeding 1 year, or to both. And there's another important part that I need to bring to your attention. Just give me a moment and I'll get you to it. An application for an exemption shall be finalized within 30 days as opposed to the 60 days allocated now. I'm bringing to your attention as well that you can have all kinds of fancy agreements. If your agreement is not in line with the Occupational Health and Safety Act, it will not be considered. Any agreement you have must be brought in line with the Act itself. Section 43, I'm not going to go through, except for this part, which is quite important. It allows the minister to make regulation, section 43. A regulation may, in respect of any contravention thereof, or failure to comply therewith, prescribe a penalty of a fine to a maximum of 5 million rand or imprisonment for a period not exceeding 5 years, or both. Now, if you go to the back of every regulation right now, where it says penalties and offences, or offences and penalties, it will talk to the issue there that I've crossed through, the 200 rand and so on, and 90 days. Be mindful that it goes up. So the contravention of a regulation goes up substantially from where it was to where we are taking it with this bill. So a heads up for you that you need to obviously be mindful of. And in the closing bit, I'm not going to go through standards. Any standard incorporated into this by way of a regulation is deemed to be a regulation and therefore can be contravened. That is a standard. Over and above the sections of the Act and the regulations, there is a component that deals with standards becoming a regulation. Take note, on page 68, it deals with the approved inspection authorities, and there you can see there's a whole section on it that is not currently in the current Act. You have your definitions, but this act now takes care of it. In closing, a magistrate's court shall have jurisdiction to impose any penalty or to make any order provided for in this act. A labor court, now this is something I want to, in closing, bring to your attention. A labor court or a high court has exclusive jurisdiction to determine a particular dispute about the interpretation or application of any provision of this act, except where the act provides otherwise. The labor court has no jurisdiction in respect of offenses in this act. So if we disagree, that is you and I or the Department of Employment of Labor and your organization, we have a disagreement in terms of interpretation, that will go to court and the court will make a decision on the interpretation. We've already had stuff like that. And in one case, the court said to the person that lodged the case there that they must go back and discuss the matter with the department because they had not exhausted the areas that fell within the ambit of both parties to resolve. So there are those aspects. Stating of case to the High Court, you can read on your own. And Program Director, within the hour allowed, I've completed the presentation. Thank you very much.
Company.